She thought she'd replaced him with someone better. What she didn't know is that he was already preparing for surgery. Not in the OR, but in his own life. And when a surgeon cuts, he cuts with precision. The final suture slid into place with clinical precision as Dr. Mason Whitlock stepped back from the operating table. The long, 12-hour trauma surgery was over, another life saved. Monitors continued their quiet, rhythmic beeping, the only sound in the otherwise hushed operating room. Mason rolled his shoulders, feeling the strain in every muscle. He confirmed the time to the attending nurse and removed his gloves slowly, ritualistically. At 44, he'd built a reputation as one of the most respected trauma surgeons on the East Coast, known not only for his skill but for his composure under pressure. His black hair, flecked with silver at the temples, had become a quiet badge of honor among the staff. There was calm in his movements, a surgeon's grace. As he stepped into the scrub room, the reality of the hour settled over him. His phone screen lit up, 3 missed calls from Celeste, no messages. Not unusual. She rarely left voicemails, preferring to talk when it suited her, often about social events or her foundation's latest fundraising gala. Mason had learned long ago to separate his marriage from his professional life. Their anniversary was coming up, a reservation already confirmed at Le Montrose, her favorite French restaurant in Silverbridge. He found the place sterile and overrated, but Celeste adored the aesthetic. He'd smiled and nodded when she suggested it, as he always did. The drive home took 15 minutes. The quiet of the streets provided a small window of peace. Their Victorian-style home sat under the shadow of old trees, its exterior immaculate, the landscaping designed to impress. It had once belonged to his grandmother, a sentimental inheritance, though now it bore little resemblance to the place he remembered. Celeste had remodeled nearly every corner. Something felt off the moment he entered. The familiar scent of expensive soy candles had been overtaken by an artificial cloud of heavy designer perfume. His senses sharpened, a response not learned in marriage but in medicine. When something was wrong, your body often knew before your mind did. Footsteps echoed above. He called out, his voice even, but received no answer. Taking the stairs slowly, he reached the master bedroom. The door stood wide open. Inside, the air was heavy with the sterile sharpness of luxury. Celeste was packing. Designer suitcases lined the wall, the same ones he had gifted her last month. She stood in front of their walk-in closet, calmly folding clothes. Her hair was freshly styled, makeup perfect, as if ready for a photo shoot. He asked no questions at first, observing, processing. Her posture didn't shift as she informed him, without looking up, that she was leaving. Not just leaving, departing for an extended vacation with someone else. A colleague from the hospital's HR department, someone Mason vaguely remembered from a charity event weeks earlier. There was no emotion in her voice.
No apology.
Only a clinical dismissal, as though he were a service she'd outgrown. He listened silently. Years in the OR had trained him to absorb data before acting. She went on, Bali, first class, legal documents already prepared, property arrangements discussed with confidence. Her smugness was unsettling, more so than the betrayal itself. Mason remained still, his thoughts assembling like surgical notes. Her certainty was a red flag. She claimed she would be taking the house, that everything had already been arranged. There was even mention of her new partner's brother, a judge. Her voice was steady as she zipped one suitcase, then another. She barely looked at him, delivering each blow with dispassion. He didn't interrupt. Eventually, she moved toward the stairs. As she passed, he blocked her path briefly, not to stop her, but to see her eyes. He needed to understand what she had become. She muttered something dismissive, annoyed at the delay. He stepped aside without a word, but as she descended, he gave her one final message, delivered with the same calm precision he used in the operating room. She paused only for a second, and then she left, the door closing behind her with the finality of a dropped scalpel. Mason remained still for several moments, the silence of the house pressing in on him. Then, as if moving on instinct, he entered the one room she had never touched. his office. A sanctuary of dark wood, leather-bound journals, and surgical textbooks. Here, her influence hadn't reached. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and began checking records. Financial, legal, digital. Patterns emerged almost immediately. Withdrawals, account changes, hidden correspondence. A knock at the front door interrupted the rhythm. Through the security monitor, he saw Mrs. Ivy Kessler, their elderly neighbor. She looked anxious. When he opened the door, her hands were shaking slightly. She hesitated, then spoke. She had something to tell him. In the kitchen, over black coffee, she revealed everything. She had seen the man from HR many times, coming and going while Mason was at work. Shed kept quiet. Her daughter, Mira, had advised discretion. But now, seeing Celeste leave, she couldn't stay silent. She pulled out a small notebook, pages filled with dates, times, details. Mason reviewed the entries methodically, eyes narrowing. He thanked her, his voice steady, and requested permission to keep the notebook. She agreed without hesitation. By the time he returned to his office, the storm had passed, literally and figuratively. Outside, the wind shook the trees, but inside, he was already assembling the pieces. Not with rage, not with grief, with precision. By the time Mason arrived back at Halstead Memorial Hospital, the emergency call had already summoned half the trauma team. The building hummed with urgency, but Mason's thoughts remained clear. Just hours earlier, his wife had walked out of their home and into the arms of a man who, until recently, had been managing HR files, not plotting to dismantle a surgeon's life. In the administration wing, tension hung in the air. Mason spotted Lucia Wren, head legal counsel, her voice sharp and direct as she stood between Victor Dane and the hospital's IT coordinator. Victor had positioned himself near a staff terminal, his body language a blend of arrogance and false authority. His attempts to assert control over employee records were being rebuffed, but his tone was smug, like a man certain of protection. Lucia wasn't impressed. Her expression was surgical, dissecting every excuse he offered with calm authority. Mason observed quietly, long enough for Victor to notice him. The shift in Victor's demeanor was subtle, a straightening of the spine, a forced smirk. But Mason didn't engage. Instead, he glanced at the nearby screen and noticed a security feed playing. Footage from earlier that evening. It showed Celeste, dressed in travel attire, entering a restricted pharmaceutical storage area. Unauthorized access. No attempt at subtlety. Lucia turned to Mason, nodding slightly. She had seen it too. The evidence was accumulating. Lorraine, or rather, Ramona Finch, his former assistant, stood nearby, her expression conflicted. Once loyal, she had clearly been compromised, but now her nerves betrayed a shift. Mason addressed her directly, asking if there was anything she needed to share. To everyone's surprise, Ramona straightened her back and spoke. She confirmed that Victor and Celeste had tried to involve her, to access his files, professional and personal. At first, she had complied, but after realizing the full scope of their intentions, including plans to accuse Mason of malpractice, she began documenting their actions. Lucia requested copies of everything. Ramona handed over a flash drive. Mason said nothing. He didn't need to. Later that night, after completing his emergency rounds, 3 critical surgeries, no complications, Mason returned briefly to the administrative wing. There, he met with Lucia and reviewed initial findings. Her legal instincts had been correct. Celeste and Victor had been transferring assets from joint accounts and leveraging her access to sensitive medical areas to build a case for takeover. But they had been sloppy. Lucia's documentation included photos, emails, texts, and now Ramona's digital files and Ivy Kessler's handwritten notebook. The case was becoming undeniable. The next morning brought a more formal confrontation. Victor's car, a gaudy red import, was parked in the executive lot. His presence in the building no longer revolved around HR duties, but around manipulation. Lucia had called for a legal review, and Mason was prepared to participate only to the extent necessary. His concern, as always, remained with his patients. But before entering the boardroom, security footage from overnight had been flagged. It showed Celeste slipping into the records room, this time with Victor. Both were seen handling files, a clear breach of protocol. Hospital security had already been alerted. As the administrators reviewed footage in Lucia's office, Mason sat quietly at the edge of the room, taking notes. His mind, always in motion, treated the unfolding crisis like a complex operation, one that required patience, data, and timing. Then came the text, short, smug, predictable. From Celeste, "Hope you enjoyed your shift. Bali is beautiful. You'll be hearing from our lawyers soon." Mason didn't respond. Instead, he reviewed the documents in front of him. Fraudulent transfers, unauthorized access, and collusion. Lucia's legal outline was crisp, a full case already forming. The final piece came that afternoon. A knock on Mason's office door revealed Talia Noor, the new head of neurosurgery. She handed over a report, but her expression suggested she already knew more than she let on. Without comment, she laid down a file on his desk, a record of performance reviews, cross-referenced with suspicious HR edits over the past 2 months. Her tone was neutral but respectful. She understood the gravity of the situation and respected the way he was handling it. Mason thanked her, then turned back to the evidence. A quiet storm was gathering, but he stood exactly where he needed to be. Focused, composed, ready. The following days unfolded with surgical clarity. Dr. Mason Whitlock moved through them like he would through a high-risk operation. Calculating, precise, unshaken by the noise surrounding him. He completed 4 trauma surgeries in 48 hours. Each successful, each documented, and each one served as an undeniable reminder to the board, to staff, and to the administration. No scandal could overshadow his value. While Victor Dane was busy attempting to maneuver legal gray zones through his connections, particularly his brother, Judge Everett Kane, Mason simply did his job. And in doing so, he made every accusation against him look like a joke. Lucia Wren continued assembling the legal framework. With Ivy Kessler's handwritten notes, Ramona Finch's flash drive, and newly recovered surveillance footage, the picture became painfully clear. It was not just a domestic betrayal. It was a coordinated effort to siphon resources, compromise hospital systems, and dismantle a man's reputation from the inside out. Lucia's updates came daily. She shared screenshots, timelines, links between Victor's previous HR roles and similar resignations from other institutions. Her expression hardened with each document she added to the case. Meanwhile, the hospital hummed with whispers. The attempted sabotage had not gone unnoticed. Staff who once smiled politely to Victor began to look away. Nurses stopped engaging in shallow conversations about his executive perks. Everyone could feel it. Something was about to snap. During one of Mason's few breaks, Talia Noor knocked on the glass wall of the trauma lounge, holding a printed scan in one hand and 2 black coffees in the other. She wasn't there for gossip. She never was. She handed over the file and sat across from him with the quiet confidence of someone who understood pressure without trying to dominate it. There was no need to discuss what was happening outside the OR. Their shared focus was clinical, professional, grounded in purpose. And yet, something in her steady gaze hinted that she respected more than his surgical skill. She respected the way he carried himself under fire. By week's end, new security footage emerged. Victor and Celeste meeting in a downtown hotel restaurant, deep in discussion with a group of sharply dressed men. Among them, a board member from Pacific Medical, a rival facility known for aggressive recruitment and unethical marketing tactics. Lucia obtained a copy of the footage through a private contact. Ramona, now fully cooperative, provided context. Victor had been planning to force Mason out of his private trauma consultancy and redirect his high-profile cases to Pacific. The payoff? A permanent executive position on the board, with Celeste along for the ride. Their entire strategy had hinged on one thing: Mason breaking. Instead, he was thriving. While Celeste and Victor plotted, Mason's protocols were adopted as standard operating procedure for the trauma wing. Hospital Director Brandon Miles, once cautious in his support, issued a public commendation after Mason led a successful full-unit response to a multi-vehicle collision. The media covered it. The board praised it. Meanwhile, across the globe, Celeste's travel posts from Bali continued. Her captions hinted at freedom, success, and new beginnings. But behind the filters and beaches, a trace of desperation surfaced in her messaging. Mason didn't look. Lucia monitored it all for legal context. One evening, as Mason wrapped up a complex abdominal repair, the doors opened quietly. Talia stood there, mask lowered, chart in hand. The patient had stabilized. Another life saved. Another victory made possible by focus and clarity, not theatrics. Later, as the two doctors sat outside the hospital cafeteria sipping bitter coffee under flickering fluorescent lights, the conversation drifted, not into gossip, but into systems, training, reform, what hospitals needed more of and less. There was no tension.
No flirtaschen.
Just two professionals who understood that excellence wasn't a mood. It was a standard. Mason returned home past midnight. The house felt still, untouched by Celeste's chaos. He walked through each room methodically, ensuring every file was where it should be, every cabinet still locked. He paused by his desk and checked the security feeds again. Nothing new, just confirmation that everything was already in motion. Victor and Celeste had underestimated the power of a man who didn't react, but calculated. They had mistaken quiet strength for absence of force, a mistake they would come to regret. 2 weeks after Celeste Ward's abrupt departure, the morning sun rose calmly over the neighborhood in Westbridge. The facade of their Victorian home gleamed, a home that once embodied a curated illusion. But the illusion had cracked. Now it stood as a silent witness to transformation. At precisely 8:04 a.m., a sleek silver car pulled into the driveway. Celeste stepped out in designer sunglasses, her expression smugly triumphant. Behind her emerged Victor Dane, impeccably dressed, carrying an air of manufactured control. They approached the front door like victors returning from a war they believed they'd won. Celeste reached into her bag and retrieved her old key, inserting it with exaggerated confidence. It didn't turn. Her brow furrowed. She tried again, slower this time. Still nothing. A third attempt, then a fourth. Panic began to settle in the corners of her carefully composed face. Victor asked a question under his breath, but she was already moving toward the window, peering inside. What she saw made her freeze. Through the kitchen doorway, a woman moved calmly. She wore no jewelry, no designer shoes, just clean, neutral clothes and an effortless kind of elegance. Her posture spoke of competence, not vanity. She was reading something, coffee mug in hand, perfectly at ease in what had once been Celeste's carefully curated space. From inside, the door opened. Dr. Mason Whitlock appeared, dressed in a navy pullover and dark jeans, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the woman stepped forward. Her features were composed, her gaze steady. Celeste stepped back as though slapped. Mason introduced her without ceremony. Talia Noor, head of neurosurgery, a respected name in academic and emergency medicine. Someone who needed no decoration to command respect. Celeste's voice rose. A protest, a threat, a demand, but her words stumbled. She claimed the house, claimed her status, claimed the past, but the past had already been removed. Talia didn't flinch. Her tone, measured and firm, corrected Celeste's claims with quiet accuracy. The house, long in Mason's name, the documents already reviewed, the false narratives unraveling. Victor attempted to intervene, referencing legal protections and family ties, but his words carried less weight now. The judge he had counted on, his brother Everett Kane, had formally recused himself from all hospital-related cases. Judicial misconduct allegations had begun trickling into the press. Across the street, Ivy Kessler stood quietly on her porch, phone raised discreetly, a witness to the downfall she had seen coming. Her daughter, Mira Halden, had prepared all the necessary legal counters. The trap that Victor and Celeste thought they had set now caved inward. Celeste's emotions spiraled. First indignation, then rage. She stormed toward the house, only to be met by Talia's poised, unmoving figure in the doorway. A quiet warning passed between them. Behind Talia, Mason stood tall. Not triumphant, but grounded. He hadn't won by force. He'd simply outlasted them. Soon, sirens echoed in the distance. A neighbor, maybe Ivy, maybe another observer, had reported a disturbance. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived, calm but firm. As they took statements, Celeste's carefully controlled exterior collapsed. Screaming accusations about betrayal, manipulation, property, none of which matched the documented facts now in the hands of Mira and Lucia Wren. Victor received a call mid-scene. His complexion turned pale as he read a message. The board at Pacific Medical had begun an internal review. Their name, now entangled in a scandal involving patient data, unauthorized access, and attempted hostile takeover. As Celeste shattered one of Mason's framed awards against the tile in a moment of uncontrolled fury, police calmly took her aside. She claimed victimhood. She insisted on her title, her ownership, her past. But nothing in her story aligned with reality. Talia remained still as glass fell around her, unaffected by the theatrics. Her presence, calm, competent, anchored, was the final contrast Celeste couldn't overcome. What had once been a performance for social validation now stood against actual merit. And merit always prevailed. Victor attempted to deflect blame as he was questioned by officers. His legal threats fell flat. He no longer controlled the narrative, he was part of the evidence. By noon, Celeste and Victor had left, not as conquerors, but as exposed schemers, stripped of leverage and surrounded by documentation. Their weapons had been manipulation and vanity. Mason's were data, timing, and surgical discipline. Back inside, the quiet returned. Talia picked up a fallen picture frame and set it back on the shelf. The moment passed without comment. No gloating, no celebration, just confirmation. That day, the final mask had fallen. What began as a betrayal had become a lesson in character, in focus, and in the silent strength of those who act, not perform. Months passed. What began with betrayal had transformed into a meticulous restructuring. Not just of a life nor its slova sredovisha. Dr. Mason Whitlock didn't just survive the scheme Celeste Ward and Victor Dane tried to execute. He outperformed, outlasted, and outshined every move they made. While their public images unraveled, Mason's reputation soared. At Halstead Memorial, the trauma unit reached new heights. His surgical protocols, once merely respected, became the national gold standard. Medical journals began referencing the Whitlock method, and residency programs requested guest lectures. He declined most. His focus remained on the patients. The work. Lucia Wren finalized every legal countermeasure. The evidence against Celeste and Victor had grown overwhelming. Financial records, video surveillance, witness testimony, all aligned to form an airtight case. Their attempt to frame Mason for malpractice was exposed as fiction. Their access to confidential data, their coordination with outside interests, and their blatant abuse of position became part of a landmark legal filing. Judge Everett Kane, once the silent pillar behind Victor's confidence, was now under formal investigation for decades of judicial manipulation. The review board had already stripped him of oversight in any medical or corporate case. His name, once synonymous with legal authority, had become a cautionary tale in law schools. Victor's future collapsed quietly. His license was suspended. His ties to Pacific Medical severed. He had counted on influence, but documentation and evidence drowned his defenses. Meanwhile, Celeste's social circle disintegrated. The invitations stopped. The curated life shed built with filters and name drops faded into silence. Designer bags and staged photographs couldn't override what the court documents revealed. Across the country, hospital administrators and compliance officers began referencing the case. Ward versus Whitlock had become an example, not of romantic drama, but of what happens when calculated sabotage meets structured resistance. And Mason? He was operating. In his restored Victorian home, every trace of the past had been stripped away. The rooms once filled with curated decor now housed medical research, quiet conversation, and forward momentum. Talia Noor, once a colleague, now a partner in every sense of the word, moved through that house not as a guest, but as a presence. Focused, grounded, intellectually matched. Their relationship had never been rushed. It evolved with the same calm discipline they brought into surgery. Mutual respect first, followed by purpose, then alignment. Together, they restructured Halstead's trauma and neurology departments, merging operations into one of the most efficient units in the region. Recognition followed. Grants, awards, protocols being adapted globally. But for Mason, success wasn't found in plaques or press coverage. It was in walking through the ER at 3 a.m. and knowing the team operated like clockwork. It was in seeing patients go home when others said they wouldn't. It was in not having to choose between integrity and results. One morning, a letter arrived from Ivy Kessler. Inside, a note and a photograph. It showed her daughter Mira Halden at a healthcare law conference, holding up their co-written case study titled The Replacement, a legal and ethical analysis of how professionalism and perseverance could dismantle systemic manipulation. Ivy had signed it with her usual neat script. "Thank you for not losing your center." Mason placed the photo on his bookshelf. That same afternoon, Celeste appeared in the hospital's front lobby, not as a socialite or claimant, but as a clerk. She'd taken a position at a low-budget clinic in another district. Her designer heels traded for budget flats. Her nails unpolished. She never approached Mason. She merely passed through the hallway during a shift change. Their eyes met briefly. She looked away first. Victor, as Mason later heard from Lucia, was processing paperwork at a construction firm. The former HR director's attempts to re-enter the healthcare field were blocked by his own documented pattern of manipulation. His name triggered automated red flags in every background check. Talia and Mason continued their quiet work. No scandal, no grand declarations, just protocols, leadership, education. Together, they trained the next generation of doctors in resilience, not performance. In one lecture, Mason offered a final reflection. "Sometimes the most critical surgery," he told the residents, "isn't in the OR. It's removing the wrong people, and the most perfect replacements are the ones that heal what was broken without leaving a scar."